Okay, here.
And hello, welcome to the Carnegie Lecture for October of 2023. We are absolutely thrilled to have, first of all, such a phenomenal audience, and then also such a phenomenal historian here to tell such a fascinating story. For those of you who don't know, this is the History Center of San Luis Obispo County. My name is Thomas Kessler. I'm the executive director. We have a semi-regular series of Carnegie lectures that we're in the process of reconsidering, making it slightly less formal, making in Carnegie chats. To that end, if you are in the audience and you have questions, there will be a Q&A session. For those of you in Zoom land, we will be monitoring the chat. So if you do have any questions during the lecture, go ahead and post them in the chat and we'll be able to see them and have them included in the Q&A at the end. So with no further ado, I would love to introduce you to Marilyn Darnell, who is an absolutely astonishing local historian. She is the historian with the Octagon Barn with the Land Conservancy, which is an organization that has done a phenomenal job of
Thomas, I'm not sure if you hear me, but I don't have any audio.
The old Octagon Barn on the southern end of town. And as a part of that mission, they were so lucky to have Marilyn involved in the history of that and making sure that they were staying true to the stories and really bringing those stories back to life at the same time that they were bringing the building back to life. And so it's just absolutely phenomenal. Marilyn was also the recipient of a History Center Award for Historic Scholarship in 2019, very well deserved. So thank you, everybody. And at this point, you all are here to learn about dairies and not hear me blather on. So I'm going to encourage everybody to give a big round of applause to Marilyn Darnell. Yeah, I'm trying to make the recording go away.
That's okay. I relinquished that.
Sorry, we thought we had our technology done, but
we don't.
We're not quite there yet.
It's taking my iPad, my new laptop.
Yeah, I was muted, but I don't have any audio at my end from Thomas's end
to accomplish this tonight. So I'm going to make do. So when you hear little pauses, it's because I'm having to orchestrate. Okay, but we need to go back to that.
I know, I'm trying to. I want to make this thing go away. Does anybody have a Mac and know the keyword combination for play on Keynote?
Well, here's play right here.
Oh, there we go. Do that. There we go. Like magic.
I came to the rescue. Okay, so I'm going to apologize right from the beginning because, as I say, I'm orchestrating to get this accomplished. I really didn't know what I was getting into when Thomas asked me, do you want to have it in person and Zoom? I thought he would be working. Yeah. Looks like I'm working. So I have to advance my show for you and for them, I have to orchestrate two different things. Plus I have to pay attention to where I'm at on my lecture. So be patient with me. So good evening. I have to make sure I'm in the view of you, and you can't, that's not very polite. Okay, so for the audience, I don't want to cover my face with the microphone, and yet I have to pay attention to what I'm doing here. I have to have a place to where I can put this stuff. Flip it that way. Okay, I'm resorting back to my days at Cuesta College with my speech class, where this is what we learned to do. You know, you wrote it out and then you put it down. Are you hearing me okay, Thomas? Okay, oh, there we go. Now I can see, I can tell the difference. Thank you for making that point. Okay, so now, before the dirt floor disappeared from the historic Octagon barn and the new shed and calf barn were built, I volunteered to become the historian of the Octagon barn for the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo. That was over 6 years ago now. And as I transitioned from more than 2 decades at the historic Jack House, I have spent these years researching the dairy history, not only of the barn, but of the county, interviewing dairymen and descendants. During COVID, I wrote my book, my 3rd book, When San Luis Obispo Was Cow Heaven, to give readers as complete an overview of the more than 100 years of the dairy history of San Luis Obispo. This evening, I will focus on the transition years of the dairy industry, which were the 1920s and 30s, as I see it. Also during COVID, I took to the back roads of the county to learn about the all-important barn. So I would like to share details of a dairy barn as I found in San Luis Obispo County that was used in the production of butter and cheese. The barn I have chosen to share belonged to dairyman Abramo Musio, who came to this county in 1876. Notice the telltale dirt floor of this milking barn. Notice, and now notice the stanchions. And if you think this barn is very large, it is. It size-wise, the Octagon barn, if you've been there, is 5,000 square feet and would hold at one time dairying about 40, 45 cows. And this barn, 104 at one time. That's a lot of cows. It's in San Luis Obispo County. I hesitate to give a location because I've not, privacy. Thank you. And now the creamery. Notice how big or how small this creamery is and how close it is to the barn. This became a problem in later years as I talk about the transition because of sanitation problems. But this is the back end of this barn. And notice, I mean, literally the roof lines look as though they're touching. They are not, but I don't know that they're even 3 feet apart. When I walked it, I think I took 2 steps, maybe 3, into the creamery. So they're very, very close. But I thought it's a very good, this barn lent me great shots of the interior, as you could see from those prior photos, that there wasn't a lot of clutter around. You could see what I was looking at very clearly. And so I'm able to use them in this kind of a presentation. Abramo Musio's story of coming to San Luis Obispo was not unlike others. He came to America as a teenager from the village of Semeo in the canton of Ticino in Switzerland. He went to Marin County, known for its dairy industry. Boatloads of young men came from the Maggia Valley of Switzerland. In fact, California reached out to that impoverished people residing in the canton of Ticino, the only Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. The connection grew to be so close that after a catastrophic flood, a call came from the old country that pulled on the heartstrings of the Ticinese in California to send money home. Life was more than difficult for those back home. With so many Ticinese men away, farms were decaying, young women went without the promise of marriage and children, and quoting from the research done by Richard Hacken, titled A History of the Swiss in California, he found that the cattle population in the village of Maggia alone steadily decreased, and by 1918 was about 1/3 of what it had been in 1850. These facts help us to understand why the funds were sent back to the old country from California. Funds by the successfully employed family members and relatives here was so crucial to bolster the economy of the Maggia Valley in that later part of the 19th century. Still, these Swiss-Italian teenagers and young men labored, saved their money to lease land and a few cows, to then make enough money to save even more, to buy their own land and to buy their own herd. Nevertheless, they sent money back home and funded the voyage for a relative or countryman to come and work for them. To this day, the ties are strong. They continue to return home year after year to visit with family there. One such local has been Herb Filipponi. Today, these generations of Swiss Italians in our county are indeed the Central Coast. Walk into museums in Santa Maria, Monterey's San Lorenzo County Park and Agriculture Museum, Cambria's Historical Museum, and Paso Robles Pioneer Museum to capture artifacts and stories, not only about the dairy history of the Central Coast, but of the Swiss Italians that have kept their culture alive. On the weekend of September 22 through 24, I was pleased to spend the entire weekend with the conclave of the Swiss on the Central Coast. But they didn't all come from the Central Coast. They came even from Switzerland. This is serious stuff for them. And this was a resurgence, you might say, of something that used to be. And the gal that spearheaded this was doing it in honor of her father, who passed away, and now for her mother. So I can only say to you, what I'm saying to you in words, I really felt. The bonds between these people was amazing. They were in conversation constantly. In fact, the gal that organized it, her husband said to her, "How did these people find out?" She says, "You just have to tell one Swiss." Before dairyman Abramo Musio was laid to rest in 1926, Musio and other dairymen realized their success and the industry that made it possible for more to come. In fact, dairyman and Mayor Louis Sinsheimer credited the dairy industry alone, and I repeat, alone, for the growth of San Luis Obispo that today we continue to enjoy. Did you know that Mayor Sinsheimer and his brother Otto were dairymen? And that Louis once owned Ranchita de Santa Fe, where the Octagon Barn sits? And notice his name. These are special people, special time periods that I'm pointing out on the chain of title. Of course, the land began as a Michaela Linares was able to take it as a Californian from the Spanish, from the King of Spain. William E. Miles stands out because he was the one that was owning the property of the Octagon Barn. Who built or ordered to have the barn built, I should say. He did not build it. Actually, a local did build it. And his granddaughter is a docent at the Octagon Barn. And his name was John Damaso. Louis Sinsheimer owned the property in 1919. He owned it for a short 1 year or so, very, very short. But Joaquin and Josephine Pereira began owning the property in 1920, and you will hear a little bit more about them in a moment. In 1866, when E.W. Steele moved his cattle headquarters to Edna, one unintended benefit of the move was the decision by many of his Portuguese hired hands to move with him. This appears to be, to me, the beginning of the Azorians on the Central Coast. The Azorians' descendants can attest to the contributions of their ancestors here, including the Pereira Lima family. The historic Pereira Octagon Barn is listed in the National Register of Historic Places for the family's nearly 3/4 of a century ownership. Following the Oregon, Mormon, and California Trail, departing the ravages of the Civil War, wagons used those indelible dirt roads once again to cross through Independence, Missouri, and Laramie, Wyoming, to come to California. And I would like to share with you a story about Mary Frances Jackson, a San Luis Obispo, who became a San Luis Obispoan. She was a true patriot, a pioneer, and a dairywoman, if I ever saw one. Mary was born in Springfield, Missouri in 1843. You see, Springfield, Missouri was divided between supporters of the Confederacy and the Union during the Civil War. But when the school principal asked for a single volunteer to defend Old Glory that night, it was young Mary that showed her spirit, courage, and bravery when she stood up with a firm, "I will." Mary knew that Confederates had torn down and stomped on the flag several times and had killed the man defending it the night before. The schoolgirl led the way until 12 girls were standing determined to protect the flag for the arrival of General Franz Sigel of the 3rd Missouri Infantry. Mary Frances's brother, who was not already in uniform that summer of 1861, threatened to join the Confederates if she went through with her plan. Undeterred, Mary spent the night dancing and singing with her schoolmates as they circled around Old Glory, flying high in the public square. As the sun came up the next morning, the townspeople gathered around the young braves. About 10 o'clock, a great cheer rang out as the faint cadence of the fife and drum could be heard in the distance, and the glistening of bayonets could be seen. General Sigel and his band of soldiers surrounded the girls in the square. He shook Mary's hand and each of her schoolmates in gratitude for their service to their country. Mary's brother held true to his word and joined the Confederates and fought against his brothers and the flag that his sister defended. Again, Mary showed her grit and perseverance when, as a newlywed, she alone drove the oxen-led wagon from White Cloud, Kansas to California. She had tied the knot with Major William Jackson, who had served 2 years in the 3rd Missouri Cavalry. The newlyweds' trek lasted 4 months. In the spring of 1864. Here's the dairy part. Yearning for milk and butter after the long journey, she instructed her husband as she handed him her treasured gold watch and chain to trade it for a cow. Much to her delight, William returned with not just one, but 2 cows. Thus began her dairying days in Sonoma, California. Each cow had a heifer, so when they decided to venture south, the cows and the heifers were in tow. Her first impression of San Luis Obispo was that it was just a small huddle of adobe huts with one narrow, dirty, and littered street that ran past the mission. So they planned to continue south to Santa Barbara County. But none other than Walter Murray persuaded them to stay when he found them 160 acres and an adobe house on previous mission land. On their southern border were the Steele brothers on the Corral de Piedra, whom the Jacksons befriended and shared visits with at each other's ranches. The Jacksons purchased cows from the Steeles, but because the original herd had begun with the cost of her gold chain and watch, Mary always claimed ownership. Major Jackson started selling milk with a single horse and a light wagon, and in time engaged a big wagon and a vigorous team for the business. Installed by Irvin McGuire, Mrs. Jackson once again showed her community leadership when she became one of the charter members of the forerunner of the Eastern Star of King David's Lodge of San Luis Obispo. This dairy woman and mother of 8 children, Julia, Ulysses, Hattie, Louise, Adeline, Robert, Fred, and Logan, left this life in 1930. And I have to tell you that her birthing years spanned 20 years. That's what I said. Meanwhile, the railroad had been successfully lured to San Luis Obispo by such prominent men as C.H. Phillips and R.E. Jack. Landowners, including dairymen along the route of the train, had given not only their right of way, but outright the land to the Southern Pacific. For them to cross their land, they understood that their land was necessary for progress and for the SP to operate properly. Their land was needed to include buildings and the all-important depot for the all-important Iron Horse. The combination of visionaries within our community and having a stop, as they called it, and a depot, as we call it, for the railroad would all but guarantee the continued success of San Luis Obispo as the place to live, work, and play. And I'm going to interject here because I can't resist that was Mr. Jack that came up with that. It worked. As you look around the country, you can see places where the railroad once stopped, but for one reason or another, they became a ghost town and were included in another new community. This has certainly not been the case with San Luis Obispo. Reefers, or refrigerated rail cars filled with blocks of ice, helped to ensure the safe transport of fruits and vegetables that were grown on the Central Coast by the Japanese population and other farmers. The same was true for milk, cheese, and butter, headed to the major markets of San Francisco and Los Angeles. In my hunt for local postcards, picturing anything to do with dairying in San Luis Obispo County, I found this one. You can clearly see the milch or milk cows grazing in SLO County. It's dated around 1911. My research points to the Southern Pacific realizing the value of our dairy land. It seems the SP owned most of Rancho Santa Isabel, located between the Salinas River and Huero Huero Creek, in Paso Robles. It is said that the Southern Pacific created a special stop near this ranch that was operated by a man who had worked for the SP for decades. The purpose of the stop was for the Southern Pacific exclusively to pick up milk from this dairy to use in their dining cars. At this time, I can only say this without confirmation, but if I'm right, this certainly would add to the importance of the railroad and our dairy history. Recently, while shopping for lumber at Miners Hardware on Santa Barbara Street, I suddenly noticed that the structure was a barn. I couldn't believe it. I can't tell you how many times I've been in that structure, and I saw it. One day I just saw it. But suddenly I did see it, and my detective hat on, I learned that the barn was used by the Southern Pacific Railroad to hold cattle that they were going to transport. You'll never look at that barn again the same. In 1920, the population in San Luis Obispo stood at 5,855. During the preceding decade, 2,100 new residents chose to make this their home, and dairying was their primary draw. To help you picture life on the dairy farm, know that it was a 365-day-a-year job and a job without vacation. Farmers and laborers throughout this county were up before the crack of dawn, milking their herd of cows by hand. They were sitting on a 1- or 3-legged stool, often fastened to their bottom, so that their hands were free to carry the milking pail as they made their way from cow to cow. This process took around 2 to 3 hours, depending on the number of cows and the number of milkers. For instance, at the Octagon Barn, at one time, there was a herd of about 60 cows with 3 milkers, and it took 2 to 3 hours just for those. So now, as I showed you that first barn that had 104 cows, we can only guess how many milkers and how long it took. 2 of the milkers that were at the Octagon Barn were actually teenagers. So they would get done with their milking, which took place at 4 o'clock in the morning. They milked until 6 or so, and then had breakfast, went off to SLO High, and then immediately had to be home because the cows needed to be milked again at 4 p.m. every 12 hours. So they milked for the 2 hours. 6 p.m. is dinner. If they had homework, they went to bed exhausted, and on went every day. The farmer and the laborers had plenty to keep their hands busy on the farm during the day when tending crops and mending fences and such. But all those cows needed to be milked again in the afternoon for another 2 to 3 hours before dinner. As you can imagine, bedtime wasn't far off because those pre-dawn hours came pretty darn quick. It was not unusual for cows to be milked 9 months of the year, which usually began in September, and then be given time to dry up so that they could reproduce. So the farmer always had a new herd starting. During the break, the farmer was busy with growing grain for the herd. So it is easy to see how labor-intensive and time-consuming dairying was. It is still labor-intensive, but different today because the labor is in the use of technology. Technology which is necessary to calculate precisely every little detail of the milking process to optimize each and every cow. They calculate precisely how many gallons of milk the cow produces, the quality of that milk, the taste, the color, the amount of its butterfat, how much time a cow gets brushed, and how or got walked around, and so forth, all with the aid of technology. The cow is monitored constantly. What is different is that it takes people at the technological helm to maintain, record, and decipher all the information for each and every individual cow. And now we are talking about thousands of cows, not hundreds. The 1920s began the second industrial revolution, causing radical changes in how milking was done after an unofficial world competition to create a mechanical milker. Since the late 1800s, inventors around the world had been trying to come up with just the right mechanical milker that was sanitary and would not hurt the cow or the milker. The De Laval milking machine, invented in Sweden, and the Mering milking machine, named after William Mering, were two that were used here on the Central Coast. Mechanical milkers were now a part of the industry. Milk was now regulated and standardized, not only locally, but by the state and the nation, by the USDA, which had been signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln in 1862. The transformation of the industry included inspectors that would take surprise samples from their dairy farm back to the laboratories to test for the percentage of butterfat, bacteria, and so forth. Grading milk ruled the land. The quality of milk told whether it was grade A and could be sold as a beverage, or if it was grade B, which could only be used for butter and cheese making. However, the milk graded A had to have come from sanitary cows under strict sanitary conditions. We can understand this part now, I think, better. I know for myself I could after COVID. I really understand the importance of being sanitary better than I did prior to COVID, how diligent you have to be. There was even a grade C that could be used the same as grade B. I hope this isn't as confusing as it sometimes it sounds to me. However, grade B and grade C were not to be used for drinking milk that was for sale. I have been told that it is estimated that for every 10 grade B farms here on the Central Coast, 1 went to grade A. Dairy farms in this county stretched from San Simeon as far as Guadalupe and over the grade as north as Paso Robles and Shandon. Dairy farms were on land that were once ranchos of beef cattle that consisted of thousands of acres. And then there was the 165 acres of the Ranchita de Santa Fe, where in 1907, Antonio Stornetta leased the Octagon Barn to begin its dairy history. There are many reasons why dairy farmers who were set up as a grade B dairy did not switch or add a grade A operation to their farm. The grade B operation had a barn with a dirt floor. Many were not equipped with the knowledge, financing, or desire to be a grade A farm. The grade A operation required a barn with cement flooring and walls that could be washed with each use to maintain cleanliness. A special room for sterilization with stainless steel utensils, pots, machinery, counters, and sinks were necessary. All of it steel. Mandatory was a cold storage room to hold milk until it was ready to be processed. And don't forget the boiler room that was paramount for sterilizing everything that was stainless steel. In addition, the cows were still eating hay, but added to their diet were special feeds to produce just the right amount, just the right product, being demanded not only by the regulators, but by the public, who were becoming more savvy shoppers. These were all costs few and far between farmers were willing and able to undertake. I had the honor of going through the remnants of a grade A dairy in this county that I'd like to share. I was told that the dairy ranch, like most, simply carried the family name. Because in those days, if you milked cows and sold milk, it was known by your last name. The dairy happened to belong to a descendant of Abramo Musio. And so you can see the cement walls. In the picture to the left, you can see the little divot in the cement. That was where the cow actually was actually lined up with the wall. And so the milker was on the opposite side and was milking the cow. It was an ingenious, I don't know if others were like this, but it's the only one that I saw. And I felt that it was quite an ingenious, but everything cement and everything stainless steel. As you can also see with all of the electrical stuff that they had to have, all of that. It truly was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The second, excuse me. So what happened that questioned the safety of milk? And why did all those changes within the dairy industry happen to make milk a safer product? One fact is to know that at the time, adults did not drink milk like we do today. Just keep that in the back of your mind. I imagine we have all seen old movies or photographs of how crowded and dirty New York City and other big cities were around the turn of the century, when Ellis Island and other ports of entry were bustling with our ancestors coming from the old country. At that time, milk was used to feed babies and hogs. Immigrants were coming from countries where they lived on a farm and were coming to make a better life for themselves in the land of milk and honey. So in the back of their tenements, they would tether a cow to produce milk for their babies and their hogs. The small space would be similar to what we might find today with an apartment or a condo. The milk was necessary for the hogs, so they could make the sausage that they were familiar with from home. So they were assured of having food on the table. This all sounds perfectly harmless, except that all too often it was found that the life of Bessie, the cow, was spent with never leaving that space and never taken off that tether. You can envision the space without me pointing out the filth that would have multiplied and would have been present. Now let's add that open bucket of milk from Bessie that was left outside in the elements, including during the heat of summer when flies buzzed about and no doubt landed on or in the milk. Meanwhile, soot, dirt, and dust were flying about. Now picture that bucket being dipped into to feed those hogs and babies. Without regard to how long that milk had been sitting, how clean and how safe do you think it was? It is hard to imagine that this happened, but it did. It was realized that these big cities around the US had the condition, and in these conditions were not rare. Simply said, the situation gained notice over decades, and through analyzing the situation, it was found that milk was the direct link to the high infant mortality rate in those places. One study that was done in New York City, when this was all going about, when New York City was trying to decide whether or not to pasteurize. So he took it upon himself for 1 year, counted how many babies were died directly related to milk, 2,000. So they demanded that pasteurization be used for milk that was going to be sold. And the very next year, it decreased to 200. With further study, they took more time. The process invented by Louis Pasteur for winemaking was used with milk, and scientists found milk became safe when it was brought to 145 degrees for 30 minutes. I understand now that depending on the kind of milk, ultra pasteurized or whatever, the times and the degrees change, but this is what it was at the time. Those 30 minutes killed the bacteria dangerous to humans. They named the process pasteurization in honor of Louis Pasteur. Furthermore, scientists found that the cleaner the milking area, the cow, and the milker were, the safer the milk would be. More time passed, but ultimately the creation of a new kind of barn was revealed. A barn with cement floors, stanchions, milk cans of steel, bottles of glass that could be washed and sterilized, all contributed to make milk safe. The milker would now be required to wear white so that dirt and debris were easily noticeable. He would be required to clean the cow's udders before attaching the sterilized milking machine and store the milk in cold storage before it was processed or pasteurized. Pasteurization was debated as to whether or not it would be mandated and regulated, and ultimately, requirements were established and enforced by the USDA. In 1973, it became illegal to sell unpasteurized milk across state lines in the United States of America. I was flabbergasted when I read 1973. If you mistakenly thought that this was the end of studying milk, you might be interested to know that it continues to be the most studied food of all time. Another De La Valle innovation that made a big difference to the dairy farmer was the cream separator. Instead of using bowls to have the cream float to the top over time and be skimmed off, which usually included some milk, not just the cream, which was the practice across the land, the separator became a time-saving device that mechanically performed the same result faster and safer, again, saving time for the dairy farmer. So just how did this cream separator work? Well, originally, manual rotation of the separator handle turned a gear mechanism which caused the separator bowl to spin. When the separator is spun, the heavier milk is pulled outward against the walls, and the lighter cream collects in the middle. The milk flows out a spout, and the cream flows out a different spout. As you can see in this photograph, there are two spouts clearly, and one would separate that have the milk, the other carried the cream. The cream separator allowed the farmer to sell his own cream rather than having to take it to a creamery, further saving the dairyman precious time and money. Not every dairy farm had a creamery, as in the photograph that I showed you. So they had to find a neighbor or somebody that would do that for them, with time, taking their wagon, putting their milk in there, all of this. So this one machine, the cream separator, saved him all of that trouble. In the 1920s, competition grew between milk production companies. The invention of the glass bottle ramped up the competition as they were embossed with the name of the company. Soon, embossing had to stand out, so it was colored. Green, orange, red, blue, and black were popular. Not only the name of the company now, but their address or phone number were soon added, and those who went the extra mile chose to have artwork. All of this to lure the customer. Some of them even had the breed of their cows. Jersey was usually the one that was noted, or the fact that they were tuberculin-free, meaning that they were healthy and sanitary. All measures meant to lure the customer. The Pereiras of the Ranchita de Santa Fe processed their milk at home dairy and used several of these tactics on their bottles that are on display at the Octagon Barn. At the same time, ads of all sizes were being taken out by dairymen, including Hollister's Creamery and Laurel Dairy. Some family names from that decade that you may recognize, who were in the Choro Valley that runs along Highway 1, are Turi, Fissalini, Canay, and Mainini. From the San Simeon area, the names of Brughelli, Salmina, Bonetti, Fissalini, Van Gordon, and Bianchi. Both the Choro Valley and the Santa Rosa region in Cambria were renowned and still are, for they enjoy access to water and great soil. The third decade of the new century saw continued growth in San Luis Obispo, with a population now of over 8,000. Purebred milking cows, such as the Guernsey, Holstein, Swiss Brown, and Jersey, had boosted not only our milk production, but the county's standing in the milk industry in the state of California. The first official surprise milking scoring in San Luis Obispo made the news. The visit was to measure how the county had fared since being given the authority to grade all market milk sold in the county. The county received a score of 93.7 out of a possible 100. Home Dairy, Guernsey Milk, and Home Dairy of San Luis Obispo were among those scoring 90 to 95%. The Home Dairy retail store was located at 719 Higuera Street. Today it's Michael's Optical, and was the Pereira's operation from Ranchita de Santa Fe. It is thought to perhaps have been the first cash and carry business in San Luis Obispo, meaning that their milk came from their herd, was processed by them, and sold directly to the customer. For their grade A milk, Crescent Dairy and Hillcrest Dairy in Paso Robles were two who received a score of 95 to 100. Dairy farmers had taken care of the pastures where their herds grazed after learning that their milk had a bad taste, especially if they had been put in a pasture, for instance, that grew onions. It's true. Dairymen had not realized the connection between the grazing land and how what grew there affected the cow's milk. With the help of Marius Salmina, the manager of Harmony Valley Creamery Association, it was learned that SLO County had received a reputation in the major markets of San Francisco and Los Angeles that had bad butter came from our county. Once again, dairymen changed their habits and instituted better grazing practices. As the Roaring '20s ended with the beginning of the Great Depression, manager Marius Salmina and the members of Harmony Valley Creamery Association in Harmony thought the time was right in order to expand, in order to ensure the future of the co-op and to keep dairymen employed and making a living. The co-op that began with 21 local members had outgrown their facility in Harmony. Now with their membership in the hundreds, a brand new plant on Nipomo Street in San Luis Obispo, along with houses, was built. Today, Reese Mortuary owns it all. Don't be afraid to ask to see their museum. There are all kinds of collectibles down there and a little bit of dairy. Harmony's expanded plant had competition in the neighborhood from Los Angeles Creamery, Golden State Creamery, Home Dairy, and George Mormon's Garden Dairy. Combined, one can see the area near the intersection of Higuera and Nipomo Streets was what I believe to be the hub of the dairy industry in San Luis Obispo. Until this summer, all that was known of any records of Harmony Valley Creamery Association was a small stack of checks from the Bank of Cambria, paying dairymen and women for their product to be processed in June of 1923. I had been told that they were rescued from a dumpster when the plant closed. However, the History Center's curator, Brittany Webb, advised me this summer that there was more. At first, the total number of containers of artifacts having to do with Harmony was 4. Then we found 3 more containers, and just last week, 1 more. Much to our surprise, I was excited to study the nearly foot-high binder of records from the dairy seasons of 1925-26 and 28-29. Each page is a record of an individual who brought butter, fat, and cream to Harmony Valley. The initial value of the product brought on each delivery day, deductions, and I don't think, only on the Spreficos and Company, you can see towards the very end in June, there's a little tiny mark, it looks like 81. That was a deduction. So it was that was taken away from what he was actually paid. And I don't know what I'm making a lot of assumptions as to that the cost was per gallon. I'm making an assumption on that. This is very, very new to me. And so, but I did want to share it because it's brand new history and it's important for us to look at. Also on that
the
same
deductions
page,
were when the
egg,
dairyman went into the creamery and bought cheese or butter.
There was somewhat of a, they needed to find new avenues to sell eggs. And so Harmony Valley agreed to do that. Some customers were members who received a dividend. And as you can see again on Spreficos, he was a member. So you can see that he got a 7% dividend. wasn't a lot of money, at least by our standards, but it does appear to be for him. The percent and the dollar amount was noted. This artifact is a window into the day-to-day workings that took place nearly 100 years ago and a major contributor to the understanding of the company. As 60 pages also were found within this one book, and I'm not exaggerating. This measures, and I didn't take a ruler, but just eyeing it, about 12 inches tall, 12 inches wide, and 12 inches long. This thing is huge, and as Thomas can attest, it's heavy. Who knows what will be uncovered in the remaining 6 containers? And just last week, the last single artifact that was found was a second one of these binders. In the 1930s, the dairy industry here was peaking. And by the end of the decade, as our men, including farmers and laborers, marched off to World War II, San Luis Obispo County was leading the state in the quality of milk produced here. Award-winning milk was coming from our farmers who hailed from Switzerland, Belgium, Portugal, England, and throughout our nation. As I see it, this time period looks like the beginning of California being recognized as a milk-producing state. Today, California, New York, Wisconsin, Idaho, and Texas provide the critical component of milk production to our nation's agricultural sector of our economy. Thousands of dairy farms stretched from the San Simeon Cambria area through Cayucas, Morro, Valley of the Bears, Choro Valley, Pismo, and Arroyo Grande, to Nipomo, not to forget Reservoir Canyon, Santa Margarita, Templeton, Paso Robles, and Shandon in North County. The number of dairy cows on each dairy farm is estimated to have averaged 50 to 100. But as we now know, some ranches had hundreds. This photograph, as you can see, I only took a tiny sliver that would fit on my screen. And this was done by Carr. What's her first name? I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, this, you can actually, I think you can still see it at Dairy Creek. She was the historian that did this for a display at Dairy Creek, the golf course. And it's amazing. So if you want to see your family name, maybe it's there. The Octagon Barn stands alone as an example of a ranch that was converted from cattle for beef, hides, and tallow that began in the 1700s when the De Anza expedition to grade B dairy to a grade A dairy before returning to a cattle ranch. The Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo first saw the property as a valuable resource to preserve and conserve for the community and guests. While visibly the public could see that the Octagon Barn was ready for collapse, the Land Conservancy also saw that the site was a critical part of the flight and riparian corridor of the 84 winding miles of San Luis Creek that flows there on its way next to the Bob Jones Trail to the Sea in Avila. One day, our property will be, I should say the Land Conservancy's property will be the trailhead to the Bob Jones Trail. The Land Conservancy has taken care to honor those buildings that originally were part of the dairy days of long ago, reimagined for today's uses, but named after those original uses on the dairy farm are the shed. You've been there. It doesn't look anything like a shed, right? No. And the dairy barn, calf barn. I have to say the calf barn is identical in the size that it was originally. I'm happy to say that this year we inaugurated the Octagon Barn Docent Program. Docent-led tours share the dairy history through those who worked the dairy farm. The story is told in the context of local history, but also state and national changes. Guests not only learn about the land and the buildings, but so important to the story, the people who owned, managed and leased, and lived on what is now 4400 Octagon Way. Certainly, the 20s and 30s were the years of transition in the dairy industry that swept our nation. As shown in this 1927 paper, Jersey cows were introduced here. Awards were given out, and individuals from the community were recognized. Locally, they were the most productive years in the amount of dairy farms in San Luis Obispo. And as Mayor Sinsheimer said, dairying was the main industry of the day. My book, When San Luis Obispo Was Cow Heaven, is available in several venues around the county, and I hope you'll take a look at it. If you have any questions, I now welcome them. Yes?
Which was the last dairy farm still operating here in the Central Coast?
It was actually in North County, and it was 1987.
Just as a quick note, thank you, everybody. It might be helpful to repeat any questions from inside
Okay.
the room so that the Zoom viewers can hear that. That was a great question. Thank you.
The question was, what was the last dairy farm? And I honestly, the name escapes me. And I don't even know that because he had it for such a short time. It was a Silva. It was the son of the Silvas that were in Reservoir Canyon. And when he gave it to his son, or his son took over, it went to North County and for a very short time. But in 1987, that was really, there was very little going on. That was it. Yeah. So thank you for the question. Anybody else? And Thomas, do you have any? My book is available throughout the county, especially here, of course, at the History Center, and through me, of course. And most of the most of the historical museums around the county have it. And I have to admit to you that I'm almost sold out. So I'm happy to say that.
It's a good problem to have.
It's a very good problem to have, considering this was my third book and the only one that has done that.
Do you consider the grantees, I think it is, that have the truck that comes to the farmer's market on Thursday, and it's also located there. I've had this thing up there in Carnegie.
Yes,
Are they part of dairy?
they were dairy. Absolutely. Negrante goes way back to the 1800s. Oh, nobody's dairy in San Luis Obispo. No one. No. Dairy today is ice cream shops and things like that. It's not cows. Yeah. Yes.
What's your understanding as to why the dairy industry sort of collapsed in San Luis Obispo County?
What is my understanding of why the dairy industry collapsed in San Luis Obispo County? We ran out of land. California has never stopped growing. And as more and more people came, more and more milk was needed. And as the milk was needed, more cows were needed. We just simply ran out of land. That's the number one reason. Anyone else? Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody here. Thank you, everybody on Zoom. I'm going to be ending the Zoom recording right now. And I encourage everybody who on Zoom land to come visit us here at the History Museum. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm not going to kick anybody out. If you want to hang out on the Zoom, you're certainly welcome, but I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. For everybody here in the museum, there is more food and wine in the back. We also do have copies of Marilyn's book available for sale. Not only Cow Heaven, but also her second book about Robert Jack, about R.E. Jack. So please come see us afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.